My parents put my sister in charge of the company, telling me straight to my face, "Chill, you're just labor." So I quit my 70-hour weeks. But when their top supplier walked away, guess who they had to call? I'm writing this from my new corner office, looking out at the Seattle skyline, and I still can't believe how dramatically my life changed in just 6 months. My name is Sarah, and this is the story of how my parents' family business imploded because they couldn't see past their golden child syndrome. Let me start from the beginning. My family owns Thompson Manufacturing, a mid-sized company that produces custom metal fabrication parts for aerospace and automotive industries. My dad, Robert Thompson, started it 35 years ago in our garage, and it grew into a legitimate business employing about 150 people. My mom, Linda, handles the administrative side and has always been Dad's right hand. I'm the older daughter by 3 years, and my sister Jessica is the baby of the family. From childhood, the difference in how we were treated was night and day. Jessica got ballet lessons, art classes, and piano tutorials. I got told to help Dad in the workshop and learn to read blueprints before I could properly tie my shoes. Don't get me wrong, I loved working with my hands and understanding how things were built. But the message was clear: Jessica was the precious princess, and I was the reliable workhorse. This dynamic followed us into adulthood. After college, where I earned a mechanical engineering degree while Jessica got a business degree she barely used, I immediately joined the family company. I started at the bottom, working assembly line positions during summers in high school, then moving up through quality control, project management, and eventually becoming the head of operations. I knew every bolt, every process, every supplier, and every client relationship inside and out. Jessica, meanwhile, spent 2 years finding herself in Europe, funded entirely by our parents. When she finally came back, she got hired as a marketing consultant with a salary higher than mine, despite having zero experience in our industry. She'd show up at 10, leave at 4, and spent most of her time redesigning our company logo and planning office parties nobody wanted. For 8 years, I carried that company on my shoulders. I worked 70-hour weeks regularly, came in on weekends, handled crisis calls at midnight, and built relationships with every major supplier and client we had. Our biggest supplier, Morrison Steel, trusted me completely. The owner, David Morrison, would often say I was the only person he'd deal with for complex orders because I understood both the technical requirements and delivery logistics better than anyone else. I managed our supply chain, coordinated with engineering teams, handled quality assurance protocols, and basically ran the day-to-day operations while my parents focused on high-level business strategy. Or at least, that's what I thought they were doing. The breaking point came on a Tuesday morning in March. I was in my office reviewing production schedules when my parents asked me to join them in the conference room. Jessica was already there, looking smug in a way that immediately put me on edge. "Sarah," my dad began, "your mother and I have been discussing the future of Thompson Manufacturing. We're getting older, and we need to start thinking about succession planning." My heart started beating faster. This was the conversation I'd been waiting for my entire career. All those 70-hour weeks, all the sacrifices, all the times I'd chosen the company over my personal life, it was finally going to pay off. "We've decided to promote Jessica to Chief Executive Officer," he continued, and the world suddenly felt like it was tilting sideways. "She'll be taking over all major business decisions and long-term strategic planning." I stared at him, certain I'd misheard. "What about me?" My mother jumped in with that patronizing smile she'd perfected over the years. "Oh honey, you'll still be head of operations. That's so important. We need someone reliable to handle the day-to-day stuff." "The day-to-day stuff?" I repeated, my voice barely controlled. "You mean running the entire production side of this company?" Jessica finally spoke up, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "Sarah, don't take this personally. We each have our strengths. I'm better with the big picture and client relationships. You're more of a technical person." "Client relationships?" I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Jessica, you don't even know the names of our top 5 clients." "I don't need to know every little detail," she waved dismissively. "That's what I have you for." This is when my father delivered the line that still makes my blood boil. He looked directly at me and said, "Sarah, chill. You're just labor. Jessica handles the business side." Just labor. 8 years of my life, reduced to just labor. I sat there in stunned silence while they outlined their grand plan. Jessica would handle all executive decisions, client presentations, and strategic planning. I would continue doing what I'd always done, everything that actually kept the company running, but now I'd be reporting to my younger sister who couldn't tell the difference between aluminum and steel without looking at a label. The meeting ended with them asking if I had any questions. I had about 1,000, but I was too shocked to voice any of them. I just nodded and walked back to my office in a daze. That evening, I called my best friend Rachel, who's been my sounding board since college. After I finished explaining what had happened, there was a long pause. "Sarah," she said finally, "you realize you're the reason that company hasn't collapsed, right? Your parents are making a catastrophic mistake." "But maybe they're right," I said, the self-doubt that had been planted in childhood rearing its ugly head. "Maybe I am just a technical person who's not cut out for leadership." "Are you kidding me?" Rachel's voice got sharp. "You've been leading that entire operation for years. You built those supplier relationships, you manage all the complex projects, you're the one everyone goes to when there's a problem. Your sister couldn't run a lemonade stand profitably." She was right, but it took me a few more days to really absorb it. During those days, I watched Jessica start her new role with a combination of horror and fascination. Her first executive decision was to redecorate the main office with expensive furniture we didn't need. Her second was to hire her college roommate as a communications coordinator at $60,000 a year. But the real wake-up call came when she started interfering with operations. Jessica decided that our delivery schedules were too conservative and began promising clients shorter turnaround times without consulting me or anyone in production. When I tried to explain why these timelines were unrealistic, she cut me off. "Sarah, I need you to think more creatively about solutions instead of just pointing out problems," she said during a staff meeting, making me look incompetent in front of people I'd worked with for years. That night, I started updating my resume. The job market for experienced operations managers in manufacturing was better than I'd expected. Within 2 weeks, I had 3 interviews lined up. The second one was with Pacific Northwest Aerospace, a growing company that manufactured components for Boeing. During the interview, the CEO, Margaret Chen, was impressed with my experience and the relationships I'd built in the industry. "I have to ask," she said, "why are you leaving a family business where you've clearly been so integral to the success?" I gave her a diplomatic answer about seeking new challenges, but I think she read between the lines. She offered me the position of Director of Operations with a 40% salary increase and, for the first time in years, I felt valued. I accepted the job but decided to give my family business a month's notice instead of the standard 2 weeks. I figured they'd need extra time to transition my responsibilities, and despite everything, I didn't want to see the company fail. The day I gave my notice was memorable for all the wrong reasons. I walked into my parents' office and handed them my resignation letter. My father read it with increasing shock, while my mother just stared at me like I'd grown a second head. "You can't be serious," Dad said. "This is our family business." "And I'm family too," I replied. "But apparently, I'm just labor." My mother tried the guilt trip approach. "Sarah, we raised you better than this. You don't abandon family when things get tough." "I'm not abandoning anyone," I said calmly. "I'm pursuing a better opportunity. Isn't that what you'd want for me?" Jessica, who had been listening from her office, came storming in. "This is so selfish. You're trying to sabotage me because you're jealous." I looked at her for a long moment, then spoke in the most level voice I could manage. "Jessica, I genuinely hope you succeed. But I won't be here to watch it happen." The month that followed was both awkward and enlightening. I spent my time documenting every process I could think of, creating detailed handoff documents, and trying to train other employees to handle my responsibilities. But the reality was that no one person could replace what I did, and my parents had never bothered to cross-train anyone or create redundancy in the operations. Jessica, meanwhile, became increasingly panicked as she realized how much she didn't know. She started asking me dozens of questions every day, most of which revealed her fundamental lack of understanding about our industry. When I tried to explain the complexities of our supply chain relationships, she'd get frustrated and accuse me of making things more complicated than they needed to be. "Why can't you just write down the names of the suppliers and what they do?" she asked one day. "Because it's not that simple," I tried to explain. "Each supplier relationship has different terms, different quality requirements, different lead times. David Morrison at Morrison Steel, for example, gives us priority scheduling because we've worked with him for 5 years and never missed a payment. But if someone else calls him asking for rush orders without that relationship foundation, he's not going to accommodate us the same way." She rolled her eyes. "I'm sure I can handle David Morrison." That's when I knew she was going to learn the hard way. My last day arrived faster than expected. The company threw a small goodbye party, and I was genuinely touched by how many employees came to wish me well. Several of them quietly asked if I thought they should start looking for other jobs, which broke my heart because these were good people who didn't deserve to suffer for my family's poor decisions. David Morrison from Morrison Steel also came to the party, which surprised everyone. He pulled me aside and said, "Sarah, I want you to know that you've been the best client relationship manager I've worked with in 30 years. If you ever start your own company, Morrison Steel will be your first supplier." That comment didn't go unnoticed by my parents or Jessica, but none of them seemed to grasp the full implication of what he was saying. My first few weeks at Pacific Northwest Aerospace were like stepping into a completely different world. Margaret Chen valued my input, trusted my expertise, and gave me the authority to make operational decisions without micromanagement. I had a team of 12 people who were excited to implement new efficiency measures, and for the first time in years, I looked forward to going to work. Meanwhile, the updates I was getting about Thompson Manufacturing were increasingly concerning. Rachel, who was still friends with several employees there, kept me informed about the chaos that was unfolding. The first major problem happened 3 weeks after I left. Jessica had decided that our standard quality control protocols were too time-consuming and implemented a streamlined process that basically involved spot checking instead of comprehensive testing. A batch of parts failed inspection at the client's facility, resulting in a $50,000 return and a very angry customer. The second problem was the supply chain disruptions Jessica had created by promising impossible delivery dates. When suppliers couldn't meet her unrealistic timelines, she started shopping around for alternatives without understanding the quality and reliability differences between vendors. She ended up ordering substandard materials from a cheaper supplier, which caused production delays when the materials didn't meet specifications. But the real disaster was brewing with Morrison Steel. According to Rachel's sources, Jessica had called David Morrison shortly after I left and basically demanded that he prioritize Thompson Manufacturing's orders over his other clients, using a tone that one employee described as entitled and condescending. David, who had been dealing with difficult clients for 30 years, was not impressed. The breaking point came in June, about 10 weeks after I'd left. Thompson Manufacturing had a rush order for a major aerospace client, ironically, one of Pacific Northwest Aerospace's competitors. The order required a specific grade of steel that Morrison Steel was one of the few local suppliers to carry in the quantities needed. Jessica called Morrison Steel and demanded delivery within a week, which was half their normal lead time for that volume. When David explained that they were already at capacity and couldn't accommodate the rush order, Jessica apparently lost her temper and started threatening to take Thompson Manufacturing's business elsewhere. David's response was swift and final. He called my parents directly and informed them that Morrison Steel was terminating their business relationship with Thompson Manufacturing, effective immediately. Not only would they not fulfill the rush order, but they were also canceling all future orders and demanding payment for current outstanding invoices within 30 days instead of the usual 60. This was catastrophic for Thompson Manufacturing. Morrison Steel had been their primary steel supplier for 8 years, providing about 60% of their raw materials. Finding alternative suppliers for that volume, with the same quality standards at comparable prices, was going to be nearly impossible, especially on short notice. I learned about this crisis on a Friday afternoon when my mother called me, crying. "Sarah, please," she sobbed into the phone. "We need your help. David Morrison won't even take our calls anymore, and Jessica doesn't know what to do. The aerospace client is threatening to cancel their contract if we can't deliver on time, and that's a $2 million order." I listened to her explain the full scope of the disaster. In addition to losing Morrison Steel, 2 other smaller suppliers had also cut ties with Thompson Manufacturing because Jessica had been arguing with them about pricing and quality standards. The company was facing a supply chain collapse that would shut down production within a month. "Why are you calling me?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Because you're the only one who can fix this," she admitted. "You know all these suppliers personally. They trust you. David Morrison specifically asked about you when he called to cancel our account. And what does Jessica think about you calling me?" There was a pause. "Jessica doesn't know I'm calling you. She's convinced she can find new suppliers on her own. But Sarah, honey, we both know that's not realistic. Not in the timeline we're working with." I felt a mix of vindication and sadness. Vindication because I'd been proven right about how difficult this job actually was, but sadness because I genuinely didn't want to see the company fail. Despite everything, Thompson Manufacturing employed 150 people, many of whom I'd worked with for years. "I'll think about it," I told my mother. "But I'm not making any promises." That weekend, I did a lot of soul-searching. Rachel argued that I should let the company fail as natural consequences for how they treated me. But I couldn't stop thinking about all the employees who would lose their jobs through no fault of their own. On Monday morning, I made a decision that surprised everyone, including myself. I called David Morrison directly. "David, it's Sarah Thompson," I said when he answered. "I heard about what happened with Thompson Manufacturing." "Sarah." His voice warmed immediately. "I was wondering when I'd hear from you. I suppose your family is pretty upset with me right now. They're in full panic mode, I confirmed. David, I need to ask you something, and I want you to give me a completely honest answer. If I were running Thompson Manufacturing's operations again, would you consider working with them? There was a long pause. Sarah, you know I respect you tremendously, but I'm not going to work with your sister. She was rude, demanding, and showed complete disrespect for our business relationship. Even if you came back, how do I know she won't interfere again? What if she wasn't in charge of operations anymore? Another pause, longer this time. Are you thinking of going back there? I'm thinking of proposing a very specific arrangement, I said carefully. Would you be willing to meet with me this week to discuss it? We met for lunch on Wednesday at a restaurant halfway between our offices. I laid out my idea, which I'd been refining since our phone call. Here's what I'm proposing, I told David. I'll go back to Thompson Manufacturing as Chief Operating Officer, with full authority over all supplier relationships and production scheduling. Jessica keeps her CEO title but focuses on marketing, sales, and administrative functions. As COO, I report directly to the board, which is my parents, not to Jessica. David nodded thoughtfully. And you think your parents will agree to this? They will if they want to save the company. They're looking at potential bankruptcy if they can't fulfill existing orders, and they know I'm their only realistic chance of rebuilding the supplier relationships they've destroyed. What about your new job? I thought you were happy at Pacific Northwest Aerospace. I was, but I'd realized something important over the past few months. I'm happy there, and Margaret Chen is a great boss. But Thompson Manufacturing is still my family's legacy. If there's a way to save it and protect those jobs, I need to try. David leaned back in his chair. Sarah, if you can get your parents to agree to this arrangement in writing, and if you can guarantee that Jessica won't interfere with operations decisions, then Morrison Steel would be willing to resume our business relationship. But I want a contract that specifies I only deal with you on all orders and scheduling. I'll make that happen, I promised. The next step was the hardest, calling my parents to propose my terms. I asked them to meet me at a neutral location, a coffee shop downtown, rather than at the company office. I wanted this conversation to happen on equal ground. My parents arrived looking haggard and desperate. My father had clearly lost weight, and my mother's usual perfect appearance was showing cracks. The stress of potentially losing the company was taking a visible toll. Thank you for agreeing to meet with me, I said once we'd all gotten coffee. I've been thinking about your situation, and I may have a solution. Hope flashed in both their eyes, but I held up a hand to stop them from speaking. Before I say anything else, I need you both to understand something. I'm not the same person who left Thompson Manufacturing 3 months ago. I've learned my value in the job market, and I've experienced what it's like to work for people who respect my expertise. If we're going to discuss me coming back, it's going to be on very different terms than before. My father nodded eagerly. Sarah, name your price. We'll pay whatever you want. It's not about money, Dad. It's about respect and authority. I've spoken with David Morrison, and he's willing to resume business with Thompson Manufacturing under one condition. I have complete control over all operational decisions, including supplier relationships, production scheduling, and quality control protocols. Of course, my mother said quickly. You'd be head of operations again. No, I corrected her. I'd be chief operating officer, with the same executive authority that Jessica has as CEO. We'd be co-executives with clearly defined responsibilities. She handles marketing, sales, and administrative functions. I handle everything related to production and operations. Neither of us interferes with the other's area of responsibility. My parents exchanged glances. What about Jessica? My mother asked. How do you think she'll feel about this arrangement? Honestly? I don't think Jessica wants the operational responsibilities anyway. She seems much more interested in the prestige and the client-facing aspects of business. This arrangement would let her focus on what she actually enjoys while ensuring the company doesn't collapse. My father was quiet for a moment, then asked, "What else do you want?" I pulled out a sheet of paper with my terms written out. I want this arrangement formalized in writing and filed with the company's incorporation documents. I want a seat on the board of directors. I want full hiring and firing authority for operations staff. And I want a guarantee that operational decisions can't be overruled by anyone except a majority vote of the board. These terms were much more aggressive than what I'd originally planned, but my conversation with David Morrison had made me realize that I held all the cards. Thompson Manufacturing needed me far more than I needed them. My parents read through my terms, and I could see them processing the implications. I was essentially demanding equal power with Jessica, something that went against their decades-long pattern of favoring her. Sarah, my mother said carefully, You're asking us to completely restructure the company's leadership. Yes, I am. Because the current structure doesn't work. You put someone with no operational experience in charge of operations, and it nearly destroyed the company. I'm offering you a way to save it, but only if you're willing to acknowledge that I bring real value to this business. My father looked up from the paper. If we agree to this, how quickly could you get Morrison Steel back? David is waiting for my call. If you agree to these terms in writing, I can have a new contract with Morrison Steel signed by the end of the week. I can also start reaching out to the other suppliers Jessica alienated. They asked for 24 hours to consider my terms, which I granted. That evening, my phone rang 3 times, first my mother, then my father, then Jessica. I let all the calls go to voicemail but listened to the messages. My mother's message was emotional, thanking me for being willing to come back and asking if there was any room for negotiation on my terms. My father's message was more business-focused, asking about the specific details of my board seat requirements. But Jessica's message was pure anger. "Sarah, I can't believe you're trying to blackmail Mom and Dad when the company is in crisis," she said in a voice tight with fury. "This is so typical of you, always trying to make everything about yourself instead of putting family first." I didn't call any of them back. They had asked for 24 hours, and I was going to give them exactly that. The next evening, my parents called and asked me to meet them at their house. When I arrived, Jessica was there too, sitting at the kitchen table with her arms crossed and a sullen expression. "We've talked it over," my father began, "and we're prepared to accept your terms with one modification. Instead of a formal board seat, we'd like you to be a senior advisor to the board with the right to attend all meetings and provide input on major decisions." I shook my head. "Dad, I appreciate the counteroffer, but it's not acceptable. Either I have voting rights as a board member, or I don't come back. This isn't a negotiation, it's the minimum level of authority I need to prevent this situation from happening again." Jessica finally exploded. "This is ridiculous. You're trying to take over the company." "No, Jessica, I'm trying to save it. If you think you can rebuild our supplier relationships and fix the operational disasters of the past 3 months, then by all means, do it. But if you want my help, then you accept that I know more about operations than you do." My mother tried to mediate. "Girls, please. We're family. We should be able to work this out." "We are working it out," I said calmly. "I proposed a solution that saves the company and plays to both our strengths. Jessica gets to keep her CEO title and focus on the aspects of business she actually enjoys. I take responsibility for the operational side that nearly collapsed under her management. Everyone wins." Jessica stood up abruptly. "Fine. But I want it in writing that marketing and sales are completely my responsibility. You don't get to interfere with client relationships or promotional strategies." "Agreed," I said immediately. "As long as you don't interfere with operations." My parents looked at each other, and I could see them having one of those wordless conversations that long married couples master. Finally, my father nodded. "All right, Sarah. We accept your terms. We'll have the lawyers draw up the paperwork this week." I felt a mix of relief and apprehension. Good. I'll call David Morrison tomorrow morning and set up a meeting to reinstate our supplier agreement. I'll also start reaching out to the other suppliers we've lost. That night, I called Margaret Chen at Pacific Northwest Aerospace to give her my notice. She was disappointed but understanding, especially when I explained that I was essentially being brought in as a co-CEO to save a family business. "I respect family loyalty," she said. "But Sarah, if this arrangement doesn't work out, you'll always have a place here. You've done excellent work in your short time with us." The transition back to Thompson Manufacturing was surreal. I was returning to the same building, many of the same people, and essentially the same job, but everything was different. I had my own executive assistant, a corner office, and for the first time in my career, real authority to make decisions without second-guessing. My first day back, I called an all-hands meeting to address the elephant in the room. I stood in front of 150 employees, many of whom had watched me grow up in this company, and explained the new leadership structure. "I know the past few months have been uncertain and stressful," I told them. "I want you to know that Jessica and I are committed to working together to stabilize operations and ensure job security for everyone here. We each have different strengths, and this new arrangement lets us focus on what we do best." The relief in the room was palpable. Several employees came up to me afterward and quietly expressed how glad they were that I was back. One of the senior machinists, Tom Rodriguez, who had been with the company for 15 years, pulled me aside. "Sarah, I've got to tell you, we were all starting to polish up our resumes. Things got pretty bad after you left. I'm glad you came back." Rebuilding the supplier relationships was challenging but not impossible. David Morrison was true to his word and signed a new contract within the week, though he built in some additional protections that reflected our recent history. Other suppliers were more cautious, requiring proof that operational authority had actually changed hands before they'd commit to new agreements. The real test came 6 weeks after my return, when we faced another rush order situation similar to the one that had caused the Morrison steel crisis. A major automotive client needed custom parts with a 2-week turnaround, tight but possible if everything went perfectly. Jessica's instinct was to immediately promise the client we could deliver, but this time she came to me first to confirm feasibility. I reviewed our production schedule, checked material availability with our suppliers, and identified 3 potential bottlenecks that could cause delays. We can make the deadline, I told her, but only if we implement overtime shifts and get priority scheduling from Morrison Steel. I'll also need approval to bring in temporary workers for assembly. She nodded and gave me full authority to manage the project as I saw fit. For the first time since I'd returned, we were actually functioning as a team. However, 3 days into the project, we hit our first major snag. One of our key machines, a CNC router that was essential for the precision cuts required on this order, started producing parts that were just slightly off specification. The deviation was tiny, we're talking about thousandths of an inch, but in aerospace manufacturing, tiny deviations can mean the difference between a part that works and a part that causes catastrophic failure. In the old days, before Jessica's disastrous tenure, I would have immediately shut down production to diagnose the problem. But I knew that Jessica was watching this project closely, and I could feel the weight of everyone's expectations. This was my chance to prove that bringing me back was the right decision. I called Tom Rodriguez, our most experienced machinist, and together we spent 4 hours troubleshooting the CNC router. We discovered that one of the cutting tools had developed microscopic wear that was affecting precision. Normally, we would have ordered a replacement tool and waited for delivery, which would have taken 2 days and blown our deadline. Instead, I called David Morrison and explained our situation. Because of our rebuilt relationship, he was willing to expedite a tool order from one of his other suppliers, getting us what we needed within 6 hours instead of 2 days. This is exactly the kind of accommodation that Jessica had destroyed with her demanding attitude, and exactly what I'd rebuilt through patient relationship management. But the machine problem had put us behind schedule, and I realized we weren't going to make the deadline with normal staffing. This is where my operational experience became crucial. I knew exactly which employees had the skills needed for each task, and I was able to reorganize our entire production flow to maximize efficiency. I brought in Mark Stevens, a recently hired engineer who had impressed me with his attention to detail, and trained him on quality control protocols. I moved Lisa Chen from her usual assembly role to machine operation, where her mechanical aptitude would be better utilized. I even convinced my father to come in and help with packaging and shipping, something he hadn't done in years but was surprisingly good at. The most challenging part was coordinating with our temporary workers. The employment agency had sent us people with basic manufacturing experience, but they didn't understand our specific quality standards or safety protocols. I spent an entire evening creating simplified instruction sheets and conducting training sessions, ensuring that everyone understood exactly what was expected. Jessica, to her credit, stayed out of the operational details but provided crucial support in other ways. She handled all client communications, giving them regular updates without revealing the internal challenges we were facing. She also managed the administrative side of bringing in temporary workers, handling paperwork and scheduling that would have taken time away from my production focus. The project was successful, delivered on time and under budget. More importantly, it demonstrated to our entire staff and our clients that Thompson Manufacturing was stable again. Word spread quickly in our industry that we were back to our previous reliability standards. 6 months after my return, the company's financial situation had completely stabilized. We had rebuilt most of our supplier relationships, secured several major new contracts, and were actually performing better than we had before the crisis. Jessica had found her rhythm focusing on marketing and client relationships, where her natural charm and enthusiasm were genuine assets. The real vindication came when David Morrison pulled me aside after a successful project delivery and said, "Sarah, I have to admit, when your parents first put your sister in charge, I thought they were going to run this company to the ground within a year. It's impressive how you've turned things around." "It wasn't just me," I replied. "It took everyone working together to fix what got broken." "Maybe," he said with a smile, "but we both know who's really running the show here." That conversation happened 3 weeks ago, and it made me realize how much my relationship with my family has evolved. My parents no longer take my contributions for granted, and they've been genuinely apologetic about how they handled the original succession planning. Jessica and I have found a working relationship based on mutual respect for each other's expertise, even if we're not particularly close personally. The most significant change has been in how I view myself and my career. For years, I had internalized the message that I was just labor, valuable for my technical skills but not leadership material. Going through this crisis and proving that I could not only save the company but actually improve it has given me confidence I didn't know I was missing. Last week, I was approached by a headhunter representing a Fortune 500 manufacturing company looking for a chief operating officer. The salary offer was substantial, about 70% higher than what I'm making now, and the opportunity for career growth is significant. 2 years ago, I would have dismissed the possibility without serious consideration, assuming I wasn't qualified for that level of responsibility. This time, I'm genuinely considering it. Not because I'm unhappy at Thompson Manufacturing, but because I now understand my own value in the job market. Whether I take the opportunity or not, the fact that I'm being recruited for executive positions at major corporations is a level of validation I never expected to achieve. I haven't told my family about the job offer yet, and I'm not sure if I will. The point isn't to use it as leverage or to create drama, it's simply that I now have options that I never believed were available to me. Looking back on this entire experience, I realized that the crisis was probably necessary for my family's business to survive long term. My parents' original succession plan was based on emotion and favoritism rather than business logic, and it would have eventually destroyed the company even if the Morrison Steel situation hadn't accelerated the timeline. Being forced to recognize my actual value, both by my family and by myself, created a foundation for sustainable success that we never had before. Jessica is genuinely good at the aspects of business she's now responsible for, and I'm operating at a level of authority that matches my actual contributions to the company. The most satisfying part isn't the vindication or the improved working conditions or even the financial stability we've achieved. It's the respect. For the first time in my career, my expertise is valued not just for its practical applications but as a core component of business strategy. My father made a comment last month that perfectly captured how much things have changed. We were in a board meeting discussing potential expansion into new markets, and he turned to me and said, "Sarah, what's your strategic assessment of the operational feasibility?" 2 years ago, he would have asked Jessica for her opinion on strategy and relegated me to questions about whether we could physically produce the products. Now, he recognizes that operational strategy is business strategy, and that my understanding of our production capabilities is essential to making smart growth decisions. I'm writing this story not as a revenge fantasy, but as a reminder that sometimes family businesses fail not because of market conditions or external factors, but because they don't properly value the people who actually make them work. My parents nearly lost their life's work because they confused effort with value and loyalty with competence. The employees who kept working through the uncertainty, the suppliers who were willing to give us a second chance, and even Jessica, who ultimately stepped up to handle her responsibilities professionally, everyone played a role in saving Thompson Manufacturing. But the foundation of that recovery was the simple recognition that operations expertise is not just labor, it's the backbone of any manufacturing business. I still don't know if I'll take that Fortune 500 job offer. Thompson Manufacturing is stable now, and there's something satisfying about building on the success we've achieved. But the most important thing I've gained from this experience isn't job security or family reconciliation, it's the knowledge that I'm capable of much more than I ever believed possible. And that confidence, regardless of where my career goes from here, is something no one can ever take away from me again.